The URC playoff race continues to heat up, and with 2 rounds to play, all 4 Irish provinces have plenty to play for. Leinster and Munster are vying to try to get top spot. For Ulster and Connacht, it's a question of finishing in the top 8 and hopefully securing Champions Cup rugby for next season. Welcome to the Left Wing Podcast. Will Slattery here with you, and I'm delighted to be joined in studio by Luke Fitzgerald and Keenan Tracy. And Keenan, I'll let you pick where we go to first after the weekend. Obviously, Munster, Connacht, the Derby game in Thomond Park in good weather. Leinster, Ospreys, we had it in the RDS. Ulster getting the win over against the Scarlets. For you, what was the big talking point coming out of the last weekend?
Well, I was in Thomond Park, so selfishly, let's start there.
Yeah,
And it was an Irish derby as well, and you have, I think, plenty to talk about in terms from a Munster perspective, but also from a Connacht perspective as well. Maybe we should start with the good stuff, and Munster, and there was plenty of good stuff in there. I was really impressed, I have to say, by Munster. We've been giving them a lot of praise over the last few weeks on the podcast for due reason. Like, I mean, they went down to South Africa, and just as they did last season, they've really sort of turned their season around, and they've built up serious momentum. And despite the short break that they had for the Champions Cup a couple of weeks ago, they just hit the ground running in Thomond Park. Scored 7 tries, 7 different try scorers. Look, we can get on and talk about how poor some of Connacht's defending was, but that's not really a Munster issue at all. I just thought some of their attacking play was scintillating, to be honest. Their short passing game really exploited Connacht. They obviously scored a great try from a Munster perspective from Calvin Nash off that set piece strike, but there was just so many good offloads and handling passes in between little gaps that they were putting each other through. So lots to like from a Munster perspective, and I know we'll get on and talk about Connacht, but great to see Simon Zebo, I think, playing really well with a smile on his face. It's going to be very interesting to see if Munster are going to give him a contract. Graham Rowntree was asked afterwards, and if you were to take him at face value and read his body language, it doesn't seem like there's going to be a contract offer on the table, but I thought he played really well. And look, he's a guy who's still getting Munster supporters off their feet in Thomond Park. I thought Alex Nankivell was excellent once again, and I think, I'm writing about this at the moment, Will. I think when you can pick a second row partnership like Tadhg Beirne and RG Snyman, when they're both fit and firing, there's not many better in the world, really, I would say. Obviously, the sad thing from a Munster perspective is it's slightly bittersweet in that you're getting a glimpse of what the next few years could be. But obviously, Snyman is going to Leinster. No need to go over old ground there. But with Munster's players back on board and fit, you can just see what a good team they are, how well coached they are, and what they're able to do with the bench, because that was a big difference. I think at the weekend, Connacht ended up going 6-2, very nearly backfired with the couple of injuries that they got, but Munster are absolutely humming. I don't think anyone's going to want to play them in the knockout stages.
What's the word I was about to use? They are humming at the moment. Like the rugby they're playing, it's funny because it's not as if under Johan van Graan and before that they didn't have big wins at Thomond Park. They always did, and they were always knocking around the top end of the table, but it's how they're playing their rugby. Like, it is extremely enjoyable to watch, and it's not a style that in Thomond Park we would have been traditionally used to seeing. We were talking off air about Tadhg Beirne's handling. You were mentioning the little passes to the forwards. For me, that's one of the huge areas of growth the team has taken forward, is the handling amongst the forwards. We're used to seeing it maybe with the Leinster team and with the Irish team, not so much potentially with Munster, but that's been a massive jump forward. Like, some of the tries they scored off the back of that forward interplay is top quality.
Yeah, it is, and I think it's probably a necessary component of being a top side now in whatever competition you're competing in. I think if you want to be, like, unless you are physically able to really dominate another team, a la Rochelle when they're at their peak, or South Africa, really, I think most teams will have to try and find routes around defences now. They're just so well organised, and that kind of nearly every team in the world seems to be coming off the line very, very hard if they're set. And then you got the extreme examples of probably South Africa and Leinster, who are really coming off the line to get all, to get you behind the gain line. So being able to ball play 1 to 15, really, really important to be able to unlock defences and make people who are coming up at speed at you make a decision, And I thought what they were really good at as well over the weekend was they really were good at that double option, and they weren't afraid also to use the front door options, which I think is really important. I think at times over the last while, I think at times on the weekend as well, I think Ireland, Leinster have fallen in love with going out the back against teams. I thought Munster were really good at using the front door options. That little tip pass Tyke Burns' ball handling skills. I mean, he's like a 10 out there at times. Seriously, I mean, so impressed with that about him. Look, we know he's a good, he's got he can sniff the turnovers. He's a great man for a break, good man for a try. We saw that against France. Obviously, that was a beautiful line he took, over there as well in the Six Nations. So he's in a really rich vein of form. He's such an important player for both Ireland and Munster, and I think he's the key man for this Munster team. I think he gives them the tempo. He's the one that gets the big turnover in defence as well, and he's a nuisance at ruck time. I mean, not always getting turnovers, but really, really impressed by him, really impressed by Munster. And I think the growth in the game, I think we saw this last year when the ground hardened up. We saw some brilliant ball handling skills. I'm thinking, was it Coombs had the little back pass last year? You have all these little moments that kind of stick out to you. Peter O'Mahony clutching that one out of the air. That was a brilliant piece of skill, So I think it's not always things that we possibly associate with the Munster teams and the Naughties. But with this team, when they're playing well, I think we do associate it with them. And I thought the guys at the back, Daly, was really industrious all day. Had some big moments. I thought that a few big ones under high balls and things like that as well. And Nash has really grown, I think, and come on from the Six Nations. Looks like a confident player to me now. So I don't think any team will want to face them. I think they've, look, with Jaeger back as well, you think maybe that might, himself and Archer at tight head, and maybe that settles things down at scrum time for them. Still probably a difference there between, themselves and Leinster, you'd probably think is the real obvious one, and possibly the Bulls too. But look, I'd be very excited if I was a Munster supporter, and they're playing great rugby. It's really, really good to see.
There's one thing I want to ask you specifically, because when we were talking about Leinster and their team selection and, maybe prioritising bringing the other guys to South Africa and leaving the guys at home to train, you said at this stage of the year you're not really getting more fitter or faster or stronger. The training has been done. But the thought did occur to me watching Munster in the final quarter against Connacht when they were running in those tries and they looked so energetic. Like, they had 2 weeks at altitude training with the first teamers, 2 tough matches, but also 2 weeks of training. Is that valuable at this time of year? Surely that maybe could give you a bit of a fitness edge in the back end of the season.
100%. I swear to God, it was like the afterburners were on when I came back from 7. Now 7 weeks is probably different to 2 weeks, but still have a massive impact on your training. And I think as well, the way they won those matches, I think of the kind of crucial Conor Murray try, things like that. Those moments, they were digging in at the end of a game. It's not that you can't get fitter, you get match fitter. I probably should have clarified that one. And I think they'll have come back from South Africa with that. And these little breaks they'll get with cup matches in between, I think, really primes this Munster team to be a real threat. And they're not going to be going away on 80, from minute 65 to 80. They're going to be hanging around, even if they're playing a team like Leinster, who could bring out, a really, really strong bench. And you think they probably have a difference there versus Munster. And nearly every team pretty much in Europe, to be honest with you, bar probably Toulouse. I think Munster won't be going away. I think they look battle hardened to me, and if they can keep everyone fit, do you know what as well, Will? I love that 10, 12, 13, axis there. They're so hard to break down defensively. I think they can be better than they were in the weekend. Connacht did open them up on occasion, and I think that'll be a nice timely reminder for them that they need to be a little bit tighter in that area against the bigger teams, because they'll finish off some of those opportunities that Connacht didn't. But I really like them defensively and in attack. They'll get all the kudos for the attack bits, but I think they're nice. None of those three are weak in defence. That's one of Crowley's big strengths over Ross Byrne, I think, is that he's actually a really, really aggressive defender. Misses very few tackles, I think. So, look, I think they're in a really good spot. I'd be excited about them if I was a Munster supporter. And I think if they've all the bodies on deck, I think they could go the whole way. I really do.
Yeah, just come in on a couple of those points. I think what they did in South Africa, though, really well was they tailored their game plan, because the game plan that they used over there wasn't, obviously there's tweaks within it, but they didn't expend their energy as much. Their kicking game was seriously clever over in South Africa, knowing that they were potentially going to run out of legs in that second half, but they were also able to stack their bench. So all these sort of things really matter and are falling into place, because I totally agree with you, Luke. The hard ground, it's not a coincidence, because we've seen this time last year when the ground firmed up, and it does go away from the point you made, Will. You think of Munster teams over the years and it's that forward grunt, but the game has moved on, and I think the Ireland players that are in that Munster squad, like if they're going up to Ireland camp in Dublin and working under Andy Farrell and Joe Schmidt when he was there, when they were coming back and when it was Johan van Gran in charge, I'd say it was pretty deflating, the style of rugby that they were getting to play compared to what they were playing when they were in Ireland camp. And I would think that has a massive knock-on effect as well, because you've guys like Peter O'Mahony who, like he has a much more rounded skill set than a lot of people will give him credit for. I think a guy like Stephen Archer has been outstanding over the last few weeks, and his comfort on the ball is probably not something we saw in most of the first half of his career, whereas he's now getting on the ball like Andrew Porter and Tyg Furlong do and playing those little link passes. So I think that's really important. And just to touch on the defence as well, I thought the defence, like obviously it got cut open too easily, you'd have to say, for the two Connacht tries, but there were three, I thought, big defensive moments at key junctures in that game at the weekend. The standout one is obviously Alex Nankervel's tackle in the corner, which was incredible. But shortly after that, there was two really key tackles as well. Tyg Byrne makes a big hit on Jack Carthy as Connacht, they're pounding away at the line. It came after a big Tom Farrell break. If Connacht scored there, it could be a different game. If Hurley Langton scores in the corner before Nankervel gets him, it could be a different game. And then the third one was Gavin Coombs was only off the bench about a minute, and he forces Bundyaki to spill the ball in midfield, and that's where Munster go, and that's the game. That's a game over. But if either of those are Connacht tries, you could be looking at a very different game. So while it was exceptional to score 7 tries, like I said, with 7 different try scorers, I thought the defensive grit and some of the defensive moments that they showed probably highlighted how much more of a rounded team they are.
You brought up Simon Zebo earlier, and I think, as you said, he's one of those players that when he's playing with a smile on his face, it is infectious to the television. I loved when Conor Murray was running in for.
Does he ever not have a smile on his face?
He just was doing this like airplane thing. Like he started from like 10 metres out. Like just
anyone else would get crucified for that.
100%. But when he does, I actually just was like laughing out loud. But I was reading your comments after. Well, it was not your comments. It was your story, Graham Roundtree's comments. It did sound kind of like a funny thing from just nothing lasts forever kind of thing. Like how did he say it? Did he say it the way I kind of interpreted it when I read it?
Yeah, like he was pretty like downbeat about it. And he was in great form, let me tell you, as he was sipping away in his beer. But he had like an opportunity to possibly leave. He did say we'll see, so I suppose he did leave it open-ended, but he said, nothing lasts forever, and also we've got young players coming through in that same position. There's talks that Munster are in for a big money signing for a back 3 player as well at the moment. So if you were reading between the lines, it would seem unlikely, but when Munster will be doing their recruitment, would obviously have been back at the tail end of last year, and look, Simon Zebo probably wasn't at his best then, probably wasn't at his fittest. He looks much sharper now, and you're kind of wondering if he was playing like that back when they were doing their planning for next season, maybe the decision would have been different. But look, there's lots of things that go into this. Like I'm sure Simon Zebo, even at this stage of his career, doesn't come cheap as well. But it would be a real shame to lose him. What is he, still only 33, 34?
Maybe 34 in some stages.
Yeah, so like he's shown it at the last few weeks. And look, when I got down to Thomond Park, I was really curious to see if Mike Haley would have been involved in the warm-up, because Mike Haley has been the automatic first choice and has been a really important player for Munster over the last few years. And he was doing the warm-up with Munster. So for Simon Zebo to have come in and taken his place for what was a really big game last weekend shows how well he's playing. And it's brilliant to see, because like you can see it on the TV, like you're saying, Will, but when you're there in the ground as well, like people genuinely buzz off him, and he's been doing that ever since he broke onto the scene with Munster. So look, it'd be a shame if he did end up leaving, and I don't know what his plans would be, if he would retire. He's already obviously done the stint abroad, but people like that are great for the game, aren't they? Like those kind of characters, you need them. Yeah.
No, look, I think more than that, for me, like I think his skill set is what Munster really need. Haley's a good player, solid player, but like Zebo has a few. I think he is there. Like he opens up the pitch for Munster, just as Tyg Byrne does, in the kind of middle of the park and in the tight exchanges, opening up little gaps for other people, being kind of a nuisance for the opposition defence. Zebo is kind of that guy for me as well, and he's got a lovely kicking game too. He's great in the air. You can kind of rely on him, even though he's a flashy player. You can rely on him. He also made a great tackle at one stage in the second half. Yeah, he's a real smart defender. He's never going to hit you hard. Not that kind of player, aggression wise. But he rarely makes a bad read in defence, bar for the try. That was pretty awful positioning, to be honest with you. Lovely pass by Carty, but once you turn your back on the player, it was pretty awful, because he could have easily made it out and tackled with his pace. So that was disappointing and actually very unusual for him. But generally speaking, he's a safe pair of hands back there, and positionally he's excellent too. So, I think he's an important player for Munster. I think, as I said, the key part for him is the ball handling part. He opens up the pitch. He's got beautiful ball handling skills and rarely makes errors when he's in space. Like if he goes through a gap, it's it's unusual that it isn't finished. You think of the Munster Leinster game as well. If he goes through the gap, it's generally over. He always makes the right decision. Whereas you look at Connacht on the other hand, I think Farrell went through a couple of gaps on a couple of occasions, missed the opportunity to pick the right pass or go past or beat the next defender. Zebo doesn't really do that. You think of the Murray try, it's a beautiful line change, very subtle kind of switch back inside. I think it was Nankivell gave him the pass, wasn't it? But he gets by the Connacht defender before he releases Murray in the 2-on-1. Whereas felt like Connacht had a few of them and they got scragged down in that situation. So still a dangerous player too. You do wish that he just was probably a little bit fitter. Looks like there's more in his tank. I feel like we're talking about retirement for a guy that still has pretty much the things that you lose when you get to the latter parts of your career as a back. That change of pace, the change of direction. He still has those things, but you just wonder, has he lost a bit of that top end pace just because he's carrying a few too many kilos for me? So I do wonder about that. I wonder is that maybe why he hasn't played as much rugby over the last couple of years. So I hope that's not the case. And we see another year out of him because you can see the quality of the guy and you can see what he means to, as you say, the Munster supporters too. He gets young people in there. You can see them all chanting his name, and he is still the guy that creates the moments of magic for them and the tries that they need.
Yeah, I think it would be a mistake to cut him loose. I understand, as you mentioned, he doesn't come cheap.
Surely it's only the price, Will.
That's what I'm thinking.
Yeah, it has to be, isn't it?
I think it would be maybe a little short-sighted, but not just for the reasons I mentioned, in terms of the buzz of the crowd and stuff. As you said, he's playing good rugby. It's not that long ago coming into the Six Nations. Remember, everyone was like, if Keenan's not fit, Zebo should be the man. Now, ultimately, Andy Farrell didn't even give him a sniff of a squad, so he's obviously thought his time has moved on internationally. But I think he's a lot to offer to Munster, and I think he'll have a lot to offer between now and the end of the season. And if they end up going on another league run and he's a focal point, I don't see how you don't. Late deals can be done. I know it's certain budgets have already probably been drawn up and stuff like that. But for someone like that, if he's playing well, maybe they didn't think he'd be playing as well coming to this part of the season. I think you have to find an allowance in there somewhere. Hopefully.
Yeah, I fully agree. And then if they did ensure that, he does stay as fit as he has been at the latter part of the season, because I don't know, maybe it's a bit like, I'm not saying it's the case, but how many footballers do you see when it's coming up to contract season and all of a sudden you turn it on?
So it happens a lot in rugby too, to be honest. Yeah.
So if it was to happen, I think, he would have to have certain standards for himself across the course of the season. But the point about the young people is such a good point as well, because you could see him afterwards, the game, young kids are still mad to get selfies and autographs, and I know that counts for something, but it's the full package you get with Zebo. He's playing so well, he's so popular in the dressing room, out of the dressing room, gets people off their feet, he puts bums on seats in terms of get crowds to Thomond Park and that, so hopefully they can get a deal done.
Well, the game in Porky Queeve last year against, what's that, 2 years ago now, against South Africa A, a game that a lot of people look at not only as an on-pitch kind of spark, but kind of the reconnection with the supporters. He scored an early try, and obviously being a Cork guy himself and playing GA growing up, the place absolutely lifted for that. And that's something that you can't just give a guy a contract for that, but it all adds up when he's playing well. I think it makes a lot of sense.
He's actually the right guy for them. You lose Earlsey, you've kind of Conway, these kind of guys, like Zebo is still a steady head back there with great skills. I think he's important to them. I really think he's an important player for them. I think they'd be mad to let him go at this stage.
From a Connacht perspective then, conceding 47 points, we had discussed them last week, and the defence was one thing that had been focused on as something that hasn't been going well for them. They needed to probably win at least 2 of the last 3. They have Stormers at home, and then they have to go to the RDS. The last game before the RDS is redeveloped. There'll be a massive emotional groundswell, I'm sure, that day. But, what did you take from their performance at the weekend? It's not going well at the moment.
Yeah, that's putting it lightly. I think it was a microcosm of what we discussed on last week's show, that defensively they've been a shambles. Maybe slightly held back last week, but that's been my sense. And look, as I said, from a Munster perspective, it was great attacking play, but we'll take Calvin Nash's try, for example. I mean, how you're able to score a first phase try from basically the halfway line was shocking, really. To be honest, I asked Pete Wilkins afterwards if it was a case, because obviously Scott Fardy has come in as defence coach, but Pete Wilkins is a defence coach at heart, because that was his initial role before he took on the head coach role. And I'm kind of thinking it must be the stuff of nightmares for a guy who's a defensive specialist. A bit like Andy Farrell taking over as head coach, his nitty gritty is still, even though he's doing lots of attack, is still the defensive side of the game. But I asked him, was it a case of players were still maybe struggling to get to grips with a new defensive system? Almost hoping that he would say, yeah, like we've introduced this new system. And like worryingly, he said no. And his quote was quite strong, actually. He said, like I'm paraphrasing, but no, that's not excuse. We've made slight tweaks, but there's no excuse for players to be making the kind of errors that they are now. At this stage of the season. And it wasn't just individual errors, because there was plenty of them. It was systematic errors as well. And to me, it just looked so muddled. They didn't really look like they were fully in tune with one another. And like I said, at this stage of the season, in such a big game where they're fighting for their life in terms of getting a playoff spot, they knew the result in South Africa with Glasgow in terms of getting the 2 bonus points, which, there was a lot of movement in there before kick-off. And they're also fighting to get into the Champions Cup next season. And I don't really buy this argument at all that Connacht would benefit from a season in the Challenge Cup. That often gets kind of thrown around. Like, they're redeveloping the sports ground at the moment. They need to put bums on seats as well. And I think the best way of doing that is by being in the Champions Cup. They want to attract players to the sports ground as well. You've got to be in the top tier of Europe. So I think the coaching staff are probably feeling the heat. I have to admit, it hasn't gone well at all. They're quite inexperienced if you look through the lot of them. Pete Wilkins has never been a head coach, and while I think there's huge potential there, they just seem to be lacking something, and because the players don't seem to be totally in tune with what's going on. So I'd be really concerned, not just for what's going to happen to them over the next couple of weeks in terms of this season, but also potentially missing out in the Champions Cup next season.
Yeah, well, the Sharks, obviously, as we touched on last week, if they win the Challenge Cup against Gloucester, they take one spot, and then obviously Benetton then beating the Sharks last weekend puts a lot of pressure on even getting a 7 spot. Even what's your perspective on even from what the performance last weekend says about their season, and even anything that jumped out to you about how they played against Munster?
To be completely honest, I think the coaches need to absolutely climb into them. I thought some of the amount of ball dropped in good positions at the start of the game against Munster when they had some decent positions was pretty awful. I actually thought they showed some good heart at the start of the game against Munster in defence. There were some really good long defensive sets, but I still thought the referee was very generous to them at times. I thought there was 100% should have been an earlier yellow card, I thought, for kind of constant infringement close to their line. But I actually thought they showed good heart, and I think there some of the, like, you think of the reaction to mistakes as well. You think of the Nankivell run in, that was awful. Like, how do you not react to that? Like, he went the opposite side of where the error was, so there should have been players even coming to fill that hole. How he ended up with no one there was bizarre. That's people going asleep. And I thought throughout the game, you could hear constantly moaning to the ref about different things. Actually, look, both sides are kind of were guilty enough at the times, but Connacht particularly, you just need to dig in and get on with your job and focus on what you're doing. Don't be focusing on what the referee should be doing. He'll do his job.
Even the thing with the conversion, when they ran up for the conversion, and then
but it was shocking. No, but it's actually bad form. No, you never.
The ref as well.
He should have given it 100%. The referee should have given a yellow card. I thought they were really lucky not to get a yellow card for that. I thought that was really, really poor form, actually. And I thought the referee made a big error not stamping down on that one. I'd forgotten about that till you mentioned it. So look, I think they have a few things that they need to look internally at, and then I think as well, the quality of the tackles, even when the game was over, like how Farrell and that tackle on Hearn is a big guy, but it's a side-on tackle. You know what I mean? He does the right thing. He has his left arm up, coming over for a right shoulder tackle. You'd be worried about Ahern's fend. He knocks that down, so he's in the space. It's like he forgets he's got a right arm attached to his body. Like, no attempt to wrap there, gets completely blown off by the bigger man, which you'd expect. Really, really bad. And you see, he goes off the feet. Like, there's no drive through. There's no good body position there. Like, if I was Munster looking at that there's obviously rumours that he's going down there next year. I'd be saying, geez, I'm not so sure about that. Like, the guy can't tackle. He used to love tackling a tall guy from the side. You just have to basically drive through the position once you get into the space. For a second centre to not be able to do that, pretty poor, I think. And you think as well, a leader like him would have been kind of helping the team out. I know I'm going in hard at him, but there was lots of that with Connacht on the weekend, like people just missing basic tackles at key moments. After, lots of guys putting in a hard shift. So there's a combination of things there that tell me that there's personal standards amongst the players are just not high enough. And people are going to sleep at different periods. When you need to be switched on the whole time against a team at home that's desperate, that needs the points. This was always going to be a big challenge for them. They needed the points too, in case they hadn't realised. So they need to be switched on as much as Munster, if not a bit more away from home. So we can go on about the coaches all we like, but I do think there's a lot of players that were making kind of basic errors at crucial junctures, and I think it's time for the players now to have a look at themselves, see if they can pull out 2 big wins now. It looks like a tall ask to me at this point.
Yeah, I'm fascinated to see how the players respond this weekend. Their last home game of the season, even if they get into the playoffs, they're going to be like an 8 seed, so they won't play in the sports grounds again. And like the Stormers struggled for long periods against the Dragons last week. Ultimately got a pretty big win with John Dobson. Talk about climbing into his players afterwards, which I thought was a disgraceful performance, even though they won by 23 points at the end. Like, so, I remember the Bordeaux Champions Cup game, the first Friday night, and there was a big, it's at the sports grounds, there'll be a big showing, and they got absolutely hosed. Yeah. So, like, for me, even if they don't make the playoffs, I think they need a big performance and a victory just to at least finish the season on a bit of a high, to have something to cling on to. If they go out again and have a similarly poor performance, with Leinster to come in the RDS, 2 weeks after.
In fairness, it can happen against Bordeaux. Like, they are magic when you know what I mean. I get the point though. Okay. And it can happen against.
Yeah, I suppose too. It was the classic though French team coming to town. It was a horrible night in December in Galway, but the pitch is a bit of a leveler now as well. That's one thing, because
kind of out of the equation.
That was the old pitch. Like, you were kind of thinking, well, they might not fancy it, but I was down at that game. That was shocking. And when you look back on it now, the writing was on the wall in terms of how now Bordeaux, I totally agree with you, Luke, are an exceptional team, but you're right, Will. They need a big performance at the sports ground. It's going to be Tiernan O'Halloran's farewell, and he went off injured at half time. And to be fair, they are missing some key players. Mac Hansen has been a big loss. I know he's
a huge loss for them, isn't he? Like, he's a proper leader for them.
He's
now
a leader, and he's infectious in everything that he does.
His skills as well, I think.
Absolutely.
That's the thing for me, Keenan. Like, you talk about Byrne, you talk about Zebo. Like, Mac Hansen's in that world for me. I mean, I don't know what you think. I think he's key for them.
He's a starting Ireland player, and Bundyaki is the only other one they have. And you'd like to see maybe a bit more from Bundyaki. The guy's one of the best centres in the world, and I don't think we've seen the best of him in a Connacht jersey for the last while. And now I accept that it's more difficult when the standard of players you have around you, but they have been unfortunate with injuries. We've mentioned it a few times about Munster this season. They've lost JJ Hanrahan, who was having a decent season. They lost Matthew Devine early on, who's been a real live wire for them over the last couple of games. And then they looked like they were going to lose Caelan Blade, and in their 6-2 almost backfired because he went down with an injury as well. So a few things on the day went against him, but like Luke said, you got to hold yourself to higher standards, I think, both from a coaching and a player's point of view.
Yeah, well, that Stormers game will be interesting. It's 5:30 kickoff this Saturday evening. So Leinster, we've got Leinster Ospreys now, 61-14. You wanted a strong team pick. Leo Cullen obliged. That's what the result was.
He's listening to the Left Wing Podcast.
Yeah,
highly doubt that. But
obviously, once the teams were announced, there was only going to be one end result, and it was a fairly heavy defeat for the Ospreys. Anything of interest from the Leinster performance before we going to get to the big picture stuff around maybe Ulster's selection for this Saturday?
Well, it's a bit of a recurring theme, with maybe a little bit sweatier than it needed to be around half time. I mean, I know they got the job done, but just a little bit leaky. That's look.
To go that in a half time, was it 14 at half time, or was it 21-14?
It was close anyway. Yeah. I can't remember.
It was a surprise.
Yeah. It was a surprise, and I was a little bit disappointed by that, because I was thinking, like, just a little sloppier than it needs to be, knowing that they were always going to get the job done. And now look, they switched when they turned it on. I thought they were outstanding. You know, they're so hard to contain. There's so many threats all over the pitch. I did think they kind of fell in love at times with maybe that kind of playing out at the back. I wish they were just a little bit more direct for a little bit longer. And I wish they were using that kind of front door option, that outside option. When those forward pods kind of outside on, I just wish they were doing a little bit of what Munster are doing at the moment, where they're just that little plus pass. Well, I call it a plus pass, but when the forward passes to the other forward with the option at the back, I just feel like they're still a little lateral for my liking. And I think without the threat of I think Keenan is pretty key for them. Without that threat at the back, I think he makes an awful lot of that kind of lateral stuff look a lot better than it actually is. Sometimes when you don't have that pace, I think they do miss him badly there at 15. So I like a little bit more direct. I think that's when they played the best stuff against Northampton at the end, like kind of midway through the first half. And I just thought when they you can fall in love with that against a worse team, and I just hope that doesn't kind of creep into, say, the next couple of weeks where you might have kind of tougher challenges against better defences and against better players, where you probably won't be as physically dominant. I think they might have to refocus on that area of the game. If I was being really picky in a 60-point win, that would be what I'd be picking, because there's a clear difference in the quality of what the Ospreys were able to produce on the weekend. So that'd be my kind of my parting thought on that. The other, on the team overall, what I did like was that good to see Jimmy O'Brien back in good form. That was a beautiful grubber in behind for O'Brien's try. He looked good too. I mean, he's very snappy, isn't he? He looks really, really quick to me. He looks like the quickest player on the pitch when he's out there every time I see him nearly. So good to see him back. He's had a pretty, poor injury kind of season alongside Jimmy O'Brien as well. And I think they might be important for Leinster, if depending on what the bench composition is. Larmour still playing well, looks a threat to me. I think he's back in the international fold at some point, I think, or definitely pushing hard for a spot there. I think he's been in really, really good form. So that's all very positive stuff, I think. And look, the pack stuff kind of speaks for itself, doesn't it, at this stage? I mean, I do think Conan was excellent when he came on. Doris was good, but I just wonder, in the bigger matches, I feel for Conan. I think he's playing great stuff. We've had this conversation a few times, Will. We think he's obviously probably should be starting for Leinster. You'd have to wonder what the player thinks himself. But look, he's still a brilliant guy to have on the bench for you. So, I think we watch and see now what he does with selection this week. It'll probably give us a good indication of who's probably going to start, over in the Champions Cup final. So that's going to be really, really interesting. And I wonder, will people be able to say if they're selected against Ulster, will they be able to make a push into the squad if they play brilliantly? Because that's going to be a really tricky match up there. I think they'll be really primed for that one. Doing a double over Leinster would be a nice little carrot for them, and a team that's kind of struggling at the moment.
Yeah, what team do you expect Leo Cullen to pick this weekend? Obviously, there's a presumption that maybe James Ryan and Hugo Keenan will be involved. They're training fully this week, and you'd think if they're going to be playing against Toulouse, they need some sort of game time. That could be off the bench, to be fair. It's funny, I'd be interested to hear what Luke thinks as well.
I met Ringrose in the gym actually in the weekend. I know it doesn't look like I was in the gym. He looks great.
You were having a jacuzzi or something?
Yeah, exactly. He was off to the ice bath. I was in the sauna. No, I think he looks really good, by the way, as well. I mean, I didn't get any insider information on that, but
come on.
No, I would give it to you. Honestly, I would sneak it out to you. I wouldn't do it on the podcast because it was great, but I'd sneak it out to you off air. No, he looked really good. I didn't ask him the question, but you'd hope he's kind of back involved as well, because I think he actually is important. He's more important than maybe I've given him credit for, I think, in that Leinster team. Ryan the key, but Keenan as well.
If he doesn't play this weekend, I don't see it.
Doesn't sound like he's going to play this weekend. And
there's still a lot of rugby to be played this season. We're talking the URC, how great the playoff race is. There's still rugby to be played. I know, obviously, the Champions Cup is the be all and end all to a large degree, but
I think he's a good bit better than Osborne.
Oh, he is, obviously.
Oh yeah, I mean, of course, Osborne has done exceptionally
really, really
well.
good. He's very, very promising.
Very well.
Yeah.
But I do think, let's talk about the three guys that Ringrose, James Ryan, and Hugo Keenan. I'm not sure how much training Hugo Keenan did on Monday. I know Leinster.
In the sports file pictures, that's the key question.
Yeah.
James Ryan was,
James Ryan sounds like he's closer to being involved against Ulster than Hugo Keenan. Despite Leinster, look, if we take Leinster at face value, they're both available for selection. But with everything, with all these injury updates, there's an element of a pinch of salt, because I'd say Leinster are trying to keep stuff back because they know Toulouse are going to be watching as well. But it seems like James Ryan has a better chance. But obviously, the two of them would be great. Ringrose appears to be much more doubtful for this weekend, and if he doesn't play this weekend, I don't know if they would play him next week. He
seems a big ask. Although he's a fit guy.
He'll have played 20 minutes of rugby since January.
Yeah. But he is a fit guy.
In a final against
I know. I don't know. I'm not sure. Yeah.
I think that's too big of a risk. So I think Gary Ringrose would need to play this weekend to be involved. All things being equal, Gary Ringrose starts. He's a co-captain of the team for a reason. But Hugo Keenan's fitness is the key to all this. Ryan, as we've agreed on so many times, is just absolutely vital to Leinster. And I think if it's off the bench or whatever this weekend, I think he'll start next weekend, all things being well, if he comes through. But Keenan is the key in terms of allowing Leinster, I think, to do what they want to do, because I would imagine they'd probably go 6-2 split in the final. But if Hugo Keenan isn't fit, I think Jimmy O'Brien being back maybe gives him an option to do that. But you were asking Luke about the Ospreys game. To me, the biggest thing was Jimmy O'Brien's performance, because if he if he got a start at fullback against Ulster this weekend, as well as Kieran Frawley has done, I think there's an argument to start Jimmy O'Brien at fullback in the final against Toulouse. I think they lack pace without Hugo Keenan.
Yes, I had actually a good chat with someone at the weekend. I was at a wedding, and this guy was saying Jimmy O'Brien, definitely, that's who I'd be starting at fullback.
Who was it?
Was it Gavin Casey, was it?
I don't remember his name. I don't want to say who it was.
What is it? Someone we should trust, or is it just a random?
No, it was just a random conversation.
I can't quote that in here.
No, I'm just saying it was a good conversation.
Was it someone from a fellow podcast?
No, it wasn't him actually. I don't know. I know his name. I won't name him here.
You don't even know his name. It was just a fella at the bar.
Yeah, exactly, just at the bar. Sure, I chatted some lad down the bus stop.
A classic
there,
bar still conversation, but it was a good conversation.
Fair enough. We'll have to take your word.
We hold ourselves to higher standards.
This unnamed Leinster aficionado. Yeah,
your unnamed friend does have a point though.
Yeah, he does.
Because I think
your unnamed friend is right.
Exactly, that was my point. He had a good point.
I think Leinster have lacked pace in the back three without Hugo Keenan there. So if Keenan's fit, that'd be obviously brilliant and a massive boost. But if he's not, and Jimmy O'Brien goes well this weekend, I'd nearly prefer to see him at full back, and then you could have Frawley on the bench, which is the ideal scenario that Leinster want.
Yeah, because you know what Frawley can do there. He is a safe pair of hands at the back. I still think you're right. I think you need to have a little bit of incisiveness back there. You need to have someone who can beat someone, and I think as well, you know, when you're playing against the top guys, there's no problem with Frawley wanting to make a hit, but I just think, you know, top end pace. They're the Toulouse boys are bloody dangerous out there. You know, I would just rather have a more natural back three player back there, making a last ditch tackle. And I think in the air as well, I'd like to see. I think O'Brien before he got injured, at the World Cup was so good in the air, and when he came on, as I've said it a couple of times, against New Zealand off the bench was one of the best performances I've seen from an Irish back in quite some time, even though it was only a short period of game. He nearly turned that thing on its head. He had a few unbelievably big moments, and was outstanding in the tackle, but also in the air. So, there's probably a decent case for that. I'd like to see him, the Grubber kick was gorgeous, but I wonder what his long kicking game is like back there. You do need to have a little bit of that. It's a part of Keenan's game that's underrated,
you
I
have
think.
James Lowe, and if Jamie Osborne plays, he's pretty good at it as well. So I think that might mitigate it as well. And he's another left footer. So you could have three.
But fullback, you will be a little bit more exposed back there. And that you do need to have a good kick game. It's not a problem for him. You can see he's got the skills there, but it's just there's a bit of tactical kind of nous around it nowadays as well. You know, the way you're kind of that kicking to the middle of the pitch was something that was never done when I was playing. It's obviously changed drastically with the kind of new rules there, with the in goal and stuff like that. So I don't know. I'd love to see him have a game. I think you're right. I think Ulster is a good opportunity to do that. Frawley is match fit. We know what he's capable of. He doesn't need to go on Ulster next week, or you could play him at 10 if you like. Just have a look at him there. If he's going to be on your bench, that probably serves a nice purpose for you and gives him a bit of game time in case Ross Byrne was to go down, in the final. So I think there's probably a case for maybe a bit of a change up there. I think it would be good for the team. I think it would give you more selection options in the week that follows, and would give you more comfort in your bench, because you do want to have guys who've played recently in a position, sitting there, coming on in what is the biggest match of the season. I think that is important to have.
And what kind of team would you expect, or would you pick generally? Like, would you expect to see Andrew Porter?
This Ulster,
again, Sheehan, Furlong, Gibson Park, Doris, Van der Fleer. Would you expect James Lowe? Would you expect to see all these guys? Would you pick them all? Because I was reading about what Toulouse plan on doing this weekend. Seemingly they're going to be resting everyone. They're playing Montpellier away. I think everyone's going to be getting the weekend off, so that's
I probably think you can see. This is what I said last week about you can play them in the first South Africa game, but you wouldn't play them in the second South Africa game. I think they all got their run out this weekend. I think you give them a rest now, and they're fresh as daisies to go, ready to go for the match. As I said, there's a few guys that will need game time. You don't want to have a complete overhaul of the squad, because it's still an important match for them in the league, I think, as well. There's plenty of quality there at Leinster, and guys who've played rugby recently enough as well, who should be able to come into the squad. You bring in the likes of a Ryan, you bring in hopefully a Keenan. You pray that Ringrose maybe gets through the latter part of this week, and possibly you can pick him. If not, I think you're right. I don't think you can bring him straight in. It's probably too much of an ask, even regardless of the quality of players. So there should be enough in the Leinster team there to go up and get a result. But maybe a couple of your key guys, you say, you know what, have a rest. Like Furlong does kind of fairly big minutes for you, probably in a big game, I think. I think the trust in Alatoa is just not there. He's proved basically he can't be trusted, I think, in the bigger matches against the bigger teams. So I think you want to be able to give Furlong as much as possible, so he definitely gets a rest for me. Porter's very durable, probably could play him up there, but I'd like to see Keane Healy get minutes. I think that makes sense. Even though you know it looks like there's a bit of a selection headache there about who goes on the bench at loosehead. Personally, I think it'd be Healy for me. I just think at the scrum, particularly against a French team, I think you want Healy there. I think he's got the experience. He won't be panicking on a big stage. Kelleher needs more rugby as well, so I think he starts. And yeah, no, I think for like the interesting thing is who partners Ryan there, you know, and that's probably an interesting enough one for them. Everyone else, I think, has got game time. The only switch I'd make is probably Frawley into 10, and I'd see Jimmy O'Brien at 15. I think they, to my mind, that gives you the most options. I'm repeating myself here, but that's the sensible play in the backs for me.
Because it's still, as Luke said, it's an important game. Ulster, after their victory last weekend, Richie Murphy being confirmed during the week as the head coach for the next 2 seasons, like, it's their last home game of the season potentially as well, obviously depending on how the last couple of games go, so they'll want to put down a marker. You know, where are they at, do you think, after the news of this week?
The stability in knowing that who your head coach has to be, if going into next season, has to be a good thing, and I think it's a great appointment, really. It's a tough job, I think, that Richie Murphy has on his hands, and I think he probably saw the scale of the task that he has in his hands over the last few weeks, but he hasn't shied away from that. And to be fair to him, and this is something I've been writing about from day one since he arrived there, he said he'd been house hunting in Belfast, so I don't think he ever saw this as, oh, I'll go up and dip my toe in for a few weeks and, you know, see how I get on. He saw that as being there for the long run. I think that's what Ulster need at the moment. I mean, there was talks of bringing in a South African from abroad, whereas I think it's great that they have someone who knows Irish rugby like the back of his hand, works really well with young players, and has good contacts as well. So hopefully this is like the first kind of step on. It is a rebuild for Ulster when you hear about the number of players that are going to be leaving, the budgetary cuts that they're going through at the end of the season. So look, I think it's going to require something very special to end theirs. It's 18 years since they last won a trophy, but to pull that off this season, I think even the most hardened Ulster supporter would agree. But in saying that, all they have to do is look at the run that Munster went on last season, and, you know, anything is possible. But now that they have Richie Murphy in place, they can obviously start planning. It'll be interesting to see if he's going to want to bring in, I would imagine he will, his own coaching staff, because he's pretty much working with Dan McFarlane's guys who were already in place. He's going to have his own ideas about players.
Might be tricky to do that, Keane. Would they be tricky? Because if you were laying off guys, like, have they got the funds to do that? Like, I'd say he's got to work with what's in situ.
Well, it depends on their contracts. Their contracts could be up.
Yeah, maybe. Sorry, that's a fair point. But
I think it could do, to be honest, with a bit of freshening up. There's still talk that Jared Payne could be coming back. Like, he knows Ulster obviously as well, but I do think Richie would probably need a bit of help there as well, as experienced as he is. And I don't think it's fair to saddle a head coach with assistants who aren't, you know. No,
it isn't. But sometimes that's, you look at, even some of the biggest clubs, like soccer clubs in the world, having, you know, they have budgetary constraints that we know of. You know, you'd nearly rather, like, people want to keep their job sometimes too, even if it's with a new head coach.
John O'Gibbs stayed when Joe Schmidt came in, and he was a success.
Yeah, exactly. So look, I think, you know, there is something to be said for that. I think, you know, that, you know, you like a really good manager, you know, should be able to work with what's there, you know, and there is some quality there. So yeah, I doubt maybe he might be able to make one appointment, but I'd say that they're financially.
I would agree.
Not probably in a
point
position.
Is that if they're out of contract, we don't know.
Oh yeah, if they're out of contract, 100%. Sorry, yeah, you know, he'll have to and that'd be great if that was the case for him, because you do want to have. You know, you want to have people there who have similar ideas to you. But look, at the same time as well, for him as a coach, good to get to try and manage other people, and good to try and think about maybe new ideas, get exposed to guys who've come from a different system. Sometimes there's no harm in that. The key thing is, are they open to his ideas? You know, and if he's a good man manager, he should be able to explain that to him. And knowing Richie as I do, you know, he's pretty tough, you know, and I think it'll be his way or the highway, I think, and that'll be a good thing, because, you know, and he's open to new ideas too as well. But once he's said it and he's picked it, you know, I think people will have to row him behind him. So, you know, he doesn't take any crap, Richie.
One thing that excited me, I was actually just watching Against the Head earlier, and Bernard Jackman mentioned that Ulster in for Hurricanes at half called Aidan Morgan, who's Irish qualified, who's been playing really well for them this year. When I've seen them, I think Hurricanes are top of Super Rugby, and if all of a sudden they can end up with a young Irish qualified New Zealand out half who's playing great rugby for the Hurricanes, that would be an absolutely unbelievable bit of business.
The Cruden bit has gone away, is it? Is that hasn't materialised?
He came out and said that he was approached, but no.
He's also quite old. Like I think I'd much be right.
Well, he was always going to be the stopgap, really.
Yeah.
Wasn't he?
Whereas this guy could potentially be a real good bit of business.
There's talks as well of Richie Murphy's son Jack, who was obviously playing for the 20s this year, joining now.
Can't say no to your dad, I suppose, isn't he?
I know he's obviously very young.
Ulster can't say no either.
But yeah, like he's obviously very young, but he could possibly be going in there as well.
So who's the fit there? Is it Doak is going in?
That's the talk, but like I think
that's messing his career around.
I think that's a really risky strategy, but I think it'll be fascinating to see how Richie sees it, because as a former out half himself, Doe couldn't have anyone better, I don't think, in terms of to be guiding him. So whoever had the bright idea to move him to 10 obviously saw something there, but I wonder if Richie Murphy will see it that way, because I have to admit, in the few games that he has played 10 and switched to 10, I haven't been that convinced that he could be a long-term 10. I think he'd be far better suited to a 9.
I think what they're seeing is they're seeing John Cooney there, and they're seeing game time, and they're seeing two good players in one position when we don't really have. I'm not sure what do you think?
Well, I was going to say Doak is like one of the many young Ulster players who like was being talked about as like a World Cup bolter before 2023, and now all of a sudden we're talking about he might be moved to out half because they've let the other guys go. It's just symptomatic of the kind of the bit of a mess of a couple of the young lads. Some of them actually, they're not even that young anymore. That's the thing. Like guys who were being seen as like next grade Irish backs, in particular in the backs, I suppose they don't maybe have the same kind of forward profile. But it kind of just reminds me of that as you guys were talking. I was like, it's just messy, and I just don't.
It messes him around a little bit. Like I think he's kind of at a crucial juncture now. Like even if he's getting 20, 30 minutes in a game, I still think that's important for him to be in the right position. 80 minutes in the wrong position. It's not like I don't see a future for him at 10. Where I do see a possible future for him, particularly once Gibson Park, if there's an injury there, like Doak could easily be competing in there. He looked like a really quality operator, great kicking game, nice passing game. It's very different at 10. It's really hard to learn it as well at this stage of your career, and I'm not sure he's got does he have the kind of break there, and he looks like he's still a little bit. Maybe he fills out a little bit as well, but he's kind of a smaller guy as well. I just feel like, I know he's not small height wise, but just generally speaking, he's a bit small to be in that 10 role. You think of Crowley is nearly he's like a small first centre, but he's tough in there. He's durable. I think you need that, to be in that 10 role if you have aspirations of going to international level, which I'm sure Doak does have that, So I don't like seeing him mess around. I think Cooney will get an injury here and there as well. He's a fairly abrasive player, but I do see why they're picking him there. He's been brilliant the last couple of weeks for them, So we watch and see on that one. Like I'd rather they spent a bit of money on that 10 slot. I think that's really important. I think it's been a problem situation for them for quite a number of years now. I just didn't think Burns was ever going to be the guy to get them to the next.
This guy Aidan Morgan, if they get this,
could be. No, but I like the sound of that, Will. I think they need to have a specialist in there. You have plenty of quality in that back line to be a threat for any team. You just need to have the right 10 in there.
He's at a crossroads in his career, because not to be overly dramatic, but this decision to go to 10 could make or break his career, because if it doesn't work, then
what does it leave him? Where does it leave him?
That's what I mean. Whereas he does look like he has real potential as a 9, and I've been a little surprised that he hasn't kicked on more than he has. Like he hasn't really been in a sniff of earning an Ireland cap. If we're being realistic, he hasn't been first choice for Ulster either. So and look, they've been unlucky with injury. Like you see today that Ian Henderson's ruled out for the next 3 months with a toe injury. He's obviously going to miss the summer tour to South Africa. James Hume, got a serious injury. He had surgery this week as well. So they've been a bit unlucky as well, but they are in the playoff spots. They do have to remember that. They're going to be, no doubt, fully loaded this weekend. And if Leinster, as we would all expect, probably tweak their team a little bit, there could be something there. But to go on and win the URC is going to require, I would say, a minor miracle. Yeah, no, definitely. We'll now turn to the left wing moment of the week in association with Bank of Ireland. And now it's a bit of a rivalry between you two now. Who can get in with the,
who gets the first email back?
Yeah, fastest finger first.
Yeah, I can't remember who actually won the race this week. So
I did, sadly.
Oh, Luke can go first.
Yeah, no, I had the Nankerville moment. You mentioned it earlier on. That was a magic bit of defence, and really, really good for any young player watching there. He gets the feet. He is still stretching for the hit, but gets the feet nice and close. Doesn't panic because Hurley Langton is quite close to the line. if you get your foot close to the contact area and you can still kind of drive through, it gives you great power on the hit. And he actually got him quite easy in the end because he didn't panic. Lots of people go for a dive tackle or a tap tackle. Really, really nice bit of play by Nankervis, and actually a key moment for the team as well. So impressed with him. His whole game was very good, but that was the big moment for me. I thought that you need to have big moments like that if you want to be a top player, and he looks like a top player to me.
My moment of the week was actually described by you as Graham Rowntree walking into the press conference with a can of beer. It's not an image you see very often in modern rugby anyway. And
he does it
Leicester-esque.
He does it a bit. That wasn't the first time. Yeah, like I love it. Yeah, It's real old school.
It is Leicester-esque.
No, Leicester always do that.
And he doesn't do it in a bit of context to it. It's not like he's coming in, all bravado. He's just coming in as if it's a bottle of water. You know what I mean? And then he came in with Jack O'Donoghue, which I thought was funny, and there was no sign of a beer in Jack O'Donoghue's protein shakes.
He's trying to give him a selection dilemma.
Do as I say, not as I do, is the rule of coaching.
I'd like to see it though. I mean,
it's great to see a bit of kind of. I suppose the character coming out of the coaches.
Well, relax. He's had a big win there. Yeah. That's a big win for them. I think at a crucial moment, and they've had a couple of big weeks. So I think he's due a beer, isn't he? I think he's allowed to have one there and enjoy the moment, and then get back onto it Sunday morning.
Yeah, I agree. So what was yours? You can finish us off.
2 good moments for me. I went with Munster as well, and I went for Tom Ahern's try. I just thought it was an exceptional bit of athleticism, the way he caught the ball from the line out and just took off. There's so much talk when Ryan Baird does something like that, and the two of them are really similar in terms of their athletic profiles, but
Tom Ahern finishes them off a lot more.
I was going to say that, and I love the bit of dog that's in Tom Ahern. He's a bit of a savage, real Munster kind of old school in him, and I hope that he'll go on the tour to South Africa this summer. Hopefully his injury actually isn't serious that he picked up. It sounds like he might miss the Edinburgh game on Friday night. Yeah, he picked up a shoulder injury, so he's struggling for this week, but he has been exceptional this season. And look, whether or not he ends up playing in either of the tests is another matter entirely, but I'd love to see him be rewarded for that form by going on the tour.
He looks like he'd be a nice fit for the Irish team, as Baird does, and I think that height is always something that you'd love to see, isn't it? So I like the part for me with him is probably the physicality at ruck time. I think Baird, he's such a big man. It is tricky for him to get into good positions there. But I think big men, can do it. That's probably the area of growth where I see, if he's to get into the Irish team, I'd love to see him be a bit more disruptive.
Baird's further down the line in his development for sure, but there's no reason why Tom Ahern I don't think.
But Ahern looks like a bit more polished in the open. You think of some of the moments where those crossfield kicks. He was he's very effective out there. You can see the athleticism. I know I absolutely grilled Farrell for that missed tackle, and he should have tackled him, but still, when you're in a bad position against a big man, oftentimes they'll kind of fall over or trip over a guy, even if they knock him over. There was no stopping the big man there. It was impressive still, even if it was a poor tackle.
Just on the Tom Ahern and the Ireland squad, it's a pity it's just a 2-week tour because you go back to the All Blacks one, it was 3 tests plus the 2 midweekers when they could bring out I'm trying to remember off the top of my head some guys who went out to play. Well, Joe McCarthy, I know featured in the midweek games. Kieran Frawley featured in the midweek games. So there was a couple of younger guys who got that chance, which I don't really see this as a tour for, Tom Ahern I think is a great player, but I don't really see him fitting into the back row at this juncture if they're going for 2 tests.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you, and we definitely won't go down a rabbit hole at this stage of the show, but we'll save it for another day. But I just mean going for the experience of being around the squad and training with them, absolutely. But I agree with you, it's a pity there isn't another game tagged on for the likes of him, but come November there's certainly going to be scope for guys like him to play, because I think Ireland will go full noise.
But if you think of the bench, the bench slots there, he could be interesting one there, and if you pick up an injury, I definitely see value in him and having him there. He would perform that Baird role for me if Baird was to pick up an injury, or if say O'Mahony picks up an injury and doesn't go on the tour, or out there, and you have to plug Baird, and then you go, okay, well, what do I do? I think you're always going to 6-2 split against South Africa. Probably you just have to nowadays, don't you? But someone like him, he can fit into the role for you, but he can also do a good job at 6. So it gives you good options. So I think that's a good shout, actually. He might have come back just in time, so hopefully it's only a short-term injury now.
And there's a lot of rugby still to be played between now and I don't know when the squad is actually named. It certainly won't be maybe after the final anyway, but there's definitely 2-3 matches, some of which will be knockout games for players to force Andy Farrell's hands. It'll be interesting to see.
And guys will get injured. Yeah. Guys will get injured too. That always happens. Someone always gets unfortunate at the end of the season, so yeah.
Plenty to play for. That's all we have time for tonight. I'd like to thank Keenan and Luke for joining me on this week's episode of the Left Wing Podcast. We will be back next week with another show, looking back on the second last round of URC fixtures and looking ahead to the Champions Cup final between Leinster and Toulouse. Until then, thanks so much for listening. and goodbye.